All right, last up, we have Mark Cantrell. He's a fish and wildlife biologist, serves with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, statewide transportation coordinator and liaison to the Florida Department of Transportation. Mark earned a BS and MS in wildlife fishery science from the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. Go Vols! It's also my alma mater, so that's, plugged out. He has over 30 years of experience in research, management, administration, in various aspects of fish and wildlife conservation with federal and state agencies in the Southeast. Mark, if you're ready, go ahead and take it away.
Hey, thank you, Jason. I appreciate that. And yeah, go Big Orange. I think you've heard a lot. We'll continue to focus on the corridors here, but you've heard a lot already on our partnerships, and I'm going to talk about how we're working on that and give you a perspective from the Fish and Wildlife Service. So this by design was a group of 4 talks connecting the Florida Wildlife Corridor, and you've heard a lot, as I said, from each one of them. I'm going to focus now on the role and perspectives of the Fish and Wildlife Service. Much of the talk features the Florida panther, a large, wide-ranging carnivore. It's native to the Southeast. It's currently found only in South Florida. And so this is a subtropical environment, home to very many people, as well as invaded by other species like Burmese pythons. So Jason provided the great overview of the corridor. Brent talked about some of the engineering innovations that are critical to maintain or reestablish the connections. And Katasha just shared that bold new plan for conservation, Section 7A1 plan that looks past the typical reactive regulatory burdens to try to reach recovery for that species. So I'm going to talk about the Fish and Wildlife Service perspective. Again, the Florida Wildlife Corridor, the corridor and the conserved lands. The Florida legislature budgeted over $2 billion for protecting land in that corridor since 2021. That was something we heard Jason initially say, and that's a pretty impressive number. The corridor already encompasses that 18 million acres, and it has all of those conserved lands and then the unprotected lands that are currently habitat that link those protected areas. So that's the image that we've seen before, but it's really a focus for us here in Florida. The usual role of Fish and Wildlife Service, especially here with the Ecological Services Division, is to review project plans, transportation plans, and we make recommendations to avoid and minimize impacts to fish and wildlife resources. And one of those, as an example, is a successful project there on Interstate 4 at the Hilochi WMA, and it reconnects with Wildlife Crossing underpass on a very busy roadway. So that has helped reconnect that particular wildlife management area. That's just a detailed part of the corridor. So the other role that Fish and Wildlife Service has, maybe one that you're more familiar with, is national wildlife refuges. The National Wildlife Refuge System includes over 29 wildlife refuges in Florida. That also includes the bragging rights for the oldest, first established national wildlife refuge, Pelican Island, which was dedicated in 1903. Over 120 years ago by Teddy Roosevelt. So the Corridor 2.0 connects those national wildlife refuges with National Park Service, U.S. Forest Service, DOD lands, as well as tribal reservations, state WMAs, the numerous state parks and state forests in Florida. So it's an extensive network of public and private conservation lands. And of course, national wildlife refuges are established for a number of reasons, but the corridor is the string really that connects all of these pearls together. So in addition to the traditional national wildlife refuges, we have 2 new large conservation areas. These are wildlife refuge areas that allow Fish and Wildlife Service involvement in corridor connections with easements. So these are two large focal areas for the wildlife corridor in Florida. And you see the Everglades Headwaters National Wildlife Refuge and Conservation Area, and then at Everglades to the Gulf Conservation Area. These are two expansive areas that are in that part of Florida that we've been focused on, especially for the Florida panther. So as you've just heard, the Florida DOT has a unique role. Katasha described how it has a NEPA assignment from the Federal Highway Administration. And then she described that one of the newest initiatives to develop that conservation plan for the Florida panther. And that's done under Section 7A1 of the Endangered Species Act. And the thought here, of course, she described in more detail, but that will aid with consultations that occur under Section 7A2 of the Endangered Species Act. And that'll all help in the long run. So it really is a big picture strategy. So again, what's the Fish and Wildlife Service role? Primarily, we've worked with partners for the Florida panther to develop that recovery plan. And that recovery plan has a number of activities in it that now the Florida DOT has identified in its own conservation plan that it can help in recovery. And again, the Endangered Species Act under Section 7A1 is how federal agencies are told by Congress in the act to utilize their authorities to aid in the recovery and protection of endangered species. So that's really important. It's not just to avoid or minimize, but in this case, Section 7A1 says that federal agencies shall utilize their authorities. And this is what we've heard described over the past couple of talks. So, of course, the Fish and Wildlife Service role in this is certainly to assist with implementation, but just stay out of the way and let them do what they do best under their own authority. So much is being accomplished by very many groups and organizations, such as the Florida Wildlife Corridor group, which is connecting to keep Florida wild. And again, these are great partners to work with, both the Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission, the Florida Wildlife Corridor Foundation, and the Department of Environmental Protection, along with DOT, which is the reason that we're here. And a reminder that when you think about it, look at your state and think about what are the most pressing issues that are affecting wildlife and transportation and recreation and all of the quality of life in your state, and wonder if you had the insight that our legislatures had over the years and the input from citizens, that it would, in fact, create, as Jason had described, a unanimous consent for this Florida Wildlife Corridor Act. This is a state law that everyone's pulling for. So I'll mention some new initiatives. We've heard about some of these, that Florida DOT Panther Conservation Plan. You've seen some of the wildlife cameras that are in extensive use around the state to monitor wildlife crossings. DOT has now created a wildlife crossings website with these cameras. Anybody can go and look at that. And so there's a link there. Brent just talked about how engineers, especially himself, have been learning and fine-tuning the crossings and associated facilities there to make sure that crossings are working. And that includes those pile bridges for canal crossings to help funnel, as well as the fencing that's necessary to make these crossings work their best. There's also some new work, some old work, as well as a lot of new work with RADs that includes thermal imaging and connected vehicle technology. These are all works in progress to improve animal detection and warnings to provide safety for drivers. Another initiative, not one here, but just an example of some of the other initiatives are to eliminate the invasive pythons that are competing for food with Florida panther, and having other impacts to our natural communities. So those new initiatives, especially the conservation plan that brings it all together, really help out. We followed the Florida panther through tough times when its numbers were greatly reduced, and now as we're making some progress towards the recovery goals, increasing human population has increased habitat loss at an alarming rate, and along with that, fragmentation and motor vehicle collisions, as described by Katasha, are really a high source of mortality of Florida panthers. With that, here's a view of that Florida Wildlife Crossings website that DOT has, publicly shared information, and it shows wildlife crossings that are already constructed, under construction, or planned. And I've overlaid that with the wildlife corridor. And looking again at Alligator Alley, real good example here of all of the existing and planned and under construction. You can see, though, that Alligator Alley is a huge barrier. It's a busy route and certainly interrupts the flow of wildlife from the north and south. It does connect significant populations of humans to the east and west coast of Florida, and so it is busy. The number of wildlife crossings there is really impressive. If we zoom in on some of those, I'll show you an example of this crossings website. You can see that there's a pop-up table. If you click on each one of those crossings, you can see this pop-up table that also has links for things such as those trail cams and images and video clips from those monitored sites. A lot of great information being captured there. Additionally, there's a link to the Google Map and Street Views, so you can start to look at that and just understand the information that's available there to help us visualize what's going on. It helps us visualize the terrain, the habitat, and there in the right-hand side of the screen, you can see that crossing, and you can see the fencing between the two sections of the highway. So those adaptations, the latest technologies, and sometimes really fundamental things help us understand that ongoing effort and the continued need for wildlife, the Florida Wildlife Corridor. So what keeps me awake at night? Certainly, like all of us, as Jason described earlier, the missed opportunities. He described some particular examples of opportunities to connect the wildlife corridor that have been lost already, and we see that every day. That's caused by some of those nagging problems, a lack of adequate funding. That's something that we all share that problem. New Floridians. New Floridians are coming every day. 800 to 1,000 new people moving to Florida daily. That's contributing to that population increase. But the thing that we see there is that these new Floridians come with varied expectations. Some of them expect a whole lot out of what they see, and sometimes it may not always be realistic. And it's just an unrelenting development pressure, and all of that leads to habitat loss and that fragmentation. Although to be optimistic, we really do have a lot of great opportunities for restoration, and opportunities that we're exploring with education and awareness, and certainly the photography that you've seen this afternoon should help you understand some of the issues, and it helps our general public understand the issues that we deal with for connecting the corridor. And so with that, really to summarize, in the shadow of busy transportation corridors, We're continuing to manage and protect natural habitats, and a lot of those management activities are focused on large carnivores, the Florida panther, iconic, endangered, and really important, as well as black bears, coyotes, and others. So as Brent has shown, if you build it, they will come. He's shown how even simple structures in the right location will be utilized and help funnel animals safely across or under these busy highways. And so large carnivores are charismatic. They're an icon of the wilderness that has been lost. Sometimes they're polarizing. But the Florida panther is really a great model for our corridors and connectivity and habitat requirements. It's an umbrella goal for the future of all of our unique ecosystems and the ecological processes that help to maintain those habitats. So with that, I'll leave you with a quote from Carl Hyson that really resonates with native Floridians, or anyone who's been there for a length of time, to realize that these unique natural communities are really rich, they're diverse, and they're worth saving. With that, I think I can take questions, and I think Katasha may have questions waiting on her as well.
Great presentation. I love it. One of the things I've wondered about Florida panther conservation and highway planning for a while is, are you looking at the future of a recovered Florida panther population when you think where the wildlife infrastructure, like is I-10 being talked about, the Florida panther wildlife crossings, for example? Are we at that point, or is I-10 being considered for its own value?
Tasha, I'm going to let you help me on this one, but I'm going to start. So I'll say that we have our wildlife crossing guidelines within the state. So, and within there, anytime, and we've updated our we call it the FDOT design manual. So it's kind of like our cookbook for how we design roads and bridges. And so within there, we've put language in there that says anytime we replace a bridge, with the new bridge, you have to consider wildlife connectivity. So for example, hey, and previously, wildlife wasn't really a consideration. With the new bridge, we're gonna put in the shelves so that wildlife can actually utilize the bridge as well. So we do things like that. I think Katash, if you want to jump in, I don't know if you heard the question fully, but basically, for the long-term recovery of the Florida panther, how far are we extending that to get those? For those of you who don't know, to get it from the endangered list to the threatened list, you need two populations of at least 250 panthers. And to get it off the threatened list altogether, you need 3 distinct populations of at least 250 panthers. So to your point, how are we going to achieve that within this transportation network that we have in the state?
Yeah, Brent, I think I would add that in addition to the thing in the FDN that you mentioned with that direction and our wildlife crossing guidelines, we're really working hard on the planning side so that wildlife crossings are not an afterthought when it hits the design process. We're really looking at getting those in the planning side with some different geospatial tools that we have. We've been partnering with, again, some of the NGOs. We've been partnering with universities. I heard someone mention Dan Smith earlier. He might be in the crowd there, but getting a lot of this pre-planning information into the hands of all the folks. So there's been a lot of focus in Brent's district, but also trying to share that knowledge and expertise amongst other districts and really getting sort of the enthusiasm in place as well as those sort of requirements, right? To think about those things in advance. And then Mark might want to jump in too, because we have what we call the efficient transportation decision-making process. And as part of that, we have these environmental technical advisory team members. Mark is one of those folks. And so from an early start of the project, those folks have the opportunity to also weigh in and provide their expertise about where connectivity is needed. And the public can do the same. We don't get as many public comments that way, but the public can do the same there. And I think it's a really robust tool going forward for us to, in process for us to capitalize on for this. But Mark, do you have anything to add?
I will add that, we start early in the process. And while we've talked a lot about the Florida panther, you'll notice that we recognize the need for connectivity for all wildlife. These large carnivores that move great distances and have large home ranges are really important. And so the black bear is another species that has been affected by roads, and certainly at nighttime when they're active, they're hard to see. They're dark colored usually, and so they're especially susceptible to being road hit. And we can use those the Florida panther along with the American black bear throughout Florida as a model to connect those habitats, and to understand that if we can get those the big carnivores across and under and through highways and connect their habitats, then most of the smaller wildlife will be able to do that, but both aquatic and terrestrial wildlife. So that process that we start early in reviewing projects, we're able to start thinking about those conservation areas and habitats. The corridor 2.0 sketches that out for us, and that gives us as reviewers on that ETDM. It gives us a heads up when we look at that and look at any new project, whether it's a road widening project or new routes, that we're able to consider what wildlife are there, as well as which wildlife might be there in the future, especially with the expanding populations of the Florida panther, hoping to move those north as a recovery goal, and to have more robust populations. We can expect to need to expand the functional wildlife crossings throughout the state.
Who else has a question? There we go.
Hi, this is Eric. This question's for Jason. Since the passing of the Florida Wildlife Corridor Act in 2021, what pushbacks or other barriers have come from the regulatory environment with the passing of that act, even though it was passed unanimously?
Yeah, thank you. So can they hear online what the question is through the mic?
Not well.
So the question was, since the passage of the act, correct me if I get this wrong, since the passage of the act, what other pushback or regulatory hurdles might have surfaced since then? And I'd say one of the elements is, as people get exposed to the idea of this corridor, some counties have 85% of their footprint within the corridor, and their local economies are really dependent. So there's concern with some counties because anything that they do is going to have an impact on the county. So making sure we go in and have conversations with them early on. Just because you're in the corridor doesn't mean you can't have land conversion. You just have to do it in a way that you're retaining those things. So conversations can be the first opportunity to sort of break down some of those barriers. The act was non-regulatory, so it's incentive-based, it's voluntary. There are some counties that are adopting the corridor protections into their comp plans. So we have some counties that have already lost a lot of their green space, and they realize they need to act and they need to have it be a little more aggressively. So they're doing that. There are other counties that the pressures are a lot less, and so they're in no rush. So I'd say those are a couple of the things we hear from people. Why don't you just go in and try to put some teeth into this? Well, we have 67 counties, and there are enough places in the corridor where that would not fly. If you step in with a regulatory approach early on, you're going to lose a lot of the places and a lot of the support that we currently have. And so you may win some battles, but the concern is that we're not quite there yet. We have not worked the relationships across the 67 counties to the point where people can say, I can see a win for me in this, and that's where we're going with it. It's a good question.
And I'll add something there if I could, Jason. I think that's a good point. I showed that map with the two new large National Wildlife Refuge conservation areas, and that's a recognition that we don't have to fence the land. We want these to be working landscapes, and with Fish and Wildlife Service at a landscape level, looking at large expanses there for conservation easements and ways to accomplish some nationally significant goals. without owning the land and having to manage the land is a statement towards that working landscape. And we want these lands to remain productive and not just for the wildlife and for panthers or bears, but productive for the folks, the ranchers, and the others who maybe already own the land. So we want to keep that in private ownership with some easements, perpetual for the future.
Good point, Mark.
Hi, great session, everyone. I kind of a conventional question. I was also wondering, mostly for you, Jason, but for everyone else, like Florida and the wildlife corridor are working on trying to get any legislation to provide money for crossings or acquiring land for the corridor, or working more with private, donations. I know different states have been doing different ways to get money. I'm just wondering if there's any, ideas in the works where it's more just volunteering and getting people as you can.
Yeah, having recurring funding is a really significant goal. And, this legislative session is still going. There's a little tack on to the end of the regular legislative session because there's still some space between the House and the Senate. But this is a tough sledding year for funding. And so a lot of us aren't going to meet the goals and be happy with where we came out, we're afraid. So, but yes, fighting for funding for the two main conservation programs in the state are Florida Forever and the Rural and Family Lands Protection Program. And those have been getting funding combined around $300 million a year for the last few years. I don't think we're going to hit that target. In moments like that, there are places where counties can step up and do local land acquisition referendums at the county level, so that there are places where they have some sensitive areas that they can step up, but the scale is a little different. We're not going to match the 300 million plus per year just by going by county referendum. So we're going to need to fill those holes. There's another great program that's called the Florida Community Trust, which I'd love to see some healthy funding this year, because that's one that can be applied to some of the messier, harder to close areas that are not going to be solved necessarily with one big fee simple acquisition of a ranch. So yeah, funding's always welcome. Payment for ecosystem services schemes is something that we can use to sort of hold the window open in some of these areas. I don't know if you guys heard the citrus industry is having a tough time. Land conversion around that is going to be very difficult in certain parts of the state. If we can just find some ways to incentivize not deciding to go to rooftops right away, we could at least save some time, catch our breath, and then come back in a year or two.
And Jason, if I could add from the wildlife crossing perspective specifically for Florida DOT, and Mark might want to jump on this too, but we're looking at ways to creatively kind of partner with developers that might be, interested in providing some funding, but maybe they're not necessarily the ones to build the crossing. So our conservation plan allows for some of those creative means of either working with those developers or working through one of the, Fish and Wildlife Service foundations, or even our state partner foundations to kind of creatively get some of that funding funneled to wildlife crossings.
Great point.
So one of the components of the gentleman's question back here that I didn't hear was around I-10 specifically, and just wondering what we're doing to prioritize the future, identifying that we have to have these populations spread from south to north, so that we don't run into kind of the rural I-10 as it is now look like I-4 by the time we're ready to bring those populations north.
I'll add a thought or two here. There are 5 districts, right? 7 FDOT districts. And District 1, where Brent is, with all those panther crossings, they've been leading. And there have been some other districts that have been catching up and doing a really good job. There are some districts along North Florida and the Panhandle that have been doing some crossings. There's a newt crossing up around Tallahassee, and a turtle. I mean, there are some in there, and there are some north-south rivers that go along there that could benefit from some ledges and some other methods underneath some of those waterways that could secure those. So we need to start thinking about fencing. And thanks to the leadership that's already going on there, I know that I've heard FDOT folks get together and have conversations around wildlife crossings with all of the districts. And so it's happening. I don't know if there's any other thoughts, but it's definitely building momentum.
So I'll say, for me, it starts with telling that story with the wildlife camera data. It's hard to argue, that, hey, these things don't work when you got all, 6,000 pictures and videos of wildlife utilized in crossings. And so I think part of the, changing that culture, if you will, within the DOTs and other districts and whatever is, giving them, we purchased cameras and gave them to the other DOT districts and say, hey, go put these underneath their bridge and see what you get. What's underneath their existing bridges. And that will hopefully inspire them to be like, man, we've got, a bear, or we've got, deer or whatever it is, underneath using our crossings or our existing bridges. And so, it should help guide them or help, them to be inspired to want to build more of these crossings. And I think that's kind of the goal is to kind of, bring what we've done in District 1 and spread that across to the rest of the state so that they can, emulate that and want to do more crossings like we've got. So.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I'm wondering, have you had any conflicts with poaching as you put your wildlife crossing on
So just to repeat the question was, have we had any issues with poaching because we put our data out on for the public consumption for wildlife utilized at crossings? I'll say I haven't heard of anything. We do have statute language that I believe, and again, it's been probably a decade since I've looked at it, but you're not allowed to hunt within, I think it's 200 yards of a roadway corridor, a public roadway. And so because of that, that would, might deter folks from wanting to do that. So, yeah.
We actually caught the poacher because that person was on our website.
Oh, there you go. So I don't know if you heard that online, but they caught the poacher because they were on camera. So yeah, we have seen hunters on our cameras, and but they were doing everything by the book. So yeah.
Thank you for your presentation. I'm Anna. I'm from Virginia, and regulation specialist there. And I'm always looking for ways to tie what we're doing for resilience as far as flooding to nature. Have you had any luck working with your resilience folks to kind of realize the benefits of flooding and combine that, say, with adaptive design criteria or new roads to incorporate some wildlife or
Right, and again, I don't know if you guys can jump in whether I can hear online, so I don't have to repeat questions, but it was, have you incorporated resilience features as part of your wildlife connectivity and adding wildlife crossings? So I'm actually the district drainage design engineer. That's my title. So I just do wildlife crossings for fun, so so resiliency is right up my alley. So I will say absolutely. I give presentations to engineers all the time. And one of the big things I hit on is, I'm gonna move this mic up so I don't have to bend over. So one of the big things I hit on is the difference between a bridge and a culvert. As an engineer, you typically have the option of do you put in a bridge or do you put in a culvert? And I always argue for the bridge for several reasons. Number one, for our drainage or design guidelines or drainage manual, we're required to have 2-foot drift clearance for a bridge, and 0 is required for a culvert. So what that means is like if you had floating debris that was coming down and it was coming downstream and it would hit the bridge, it could damage the bridge. So we provide 2-foot of drift clearance there so that it doesn't, do damage to the bridge. So it provides an extra factor of safety for bridge versus a culvert. And then secondly, typically with a bridge, you have a trapezoidal cross section versus a culvert is usually, square vertical sides or whatever. And so with that, as you get the rising water levels, then you get more factor of safety because you get a larger, cross section as the water, elevates in that trapezoidal section. And then thirdly, the bridges offer a much better opportunity to add wildlife shelves than does a culvert, because it's hard to get on a vertical wall to get any sort of ledges or anything in there. And then lastly, in Florida, we have a very high groundwater table. Just about everywhere you go, dig a foot down, you're in the groundwater. And so typically to put in a culvert, you have to dewater the area, which has an added expense. It's very difficult, especially in some of our wetter areas. So to put in a bridge, you just have to drive piles on the ground. You don't have to dewater. So oftentimes it's cheaper just to do a bridge than a culvert. So for all those reasons, I tell our engineers to, if you got a choice, go with the bridge every time. So.
The maintenance of bumpers is very expensive to make it.
So that's a great question. The question was, is the maintenance of bridges more expensive than maintenance of culverts? So I don't know if in the other presentation for the state, any for FDOT, any culverts, whether it's a bridge culvert or bridge, longer than 20 feet is considered a bridge, and it has to be inspected every 2 years. And so with that inspection, then you get the, hey, there could be damage, whatever. But our bridges are designed for, 7,500 year service life. So in theory, there's not a ton of maintenance that's required with them. If you, depending on where you're at, you could get scouring on the piles or whatever, but that could happen with a culvert as well. So I don't think there's any more maintenance. It's maybe just that inspections that you have to get associated with those. And, I don't think any of that cost is insignificant, again, over the 100-year service life of a bridge. So. And the benefits that you get out of it from the resiliency, wildlife connectivity, and the ease of construction. Yeah. What other questions?
Building on Dan's question, what about maintenance in general of wildlife crossings? How is Florida taking advantage of that?
That is a fantastic question. So the question was, how do we maintain our wildlife crossings? So I'll say that I-75 Alligator Alley, those were built way before my time. Great job. Kudos to those visionaries way back in the day. To my knowledge, since they were built in the I think it was in the 90s, around 90, 91, all 38 structures there, they had never been monitored. So we built the crossings and they never put a camera underneath them to see if they even worked or not. So about 8 years ago or so, 10 years ago, we put cameras underneath all the bridges. Sure enough, they're working great. So if you go to that map that was mentioned earlier, you can click on each one of those bridges and find pictures and videos of wildlife utilizing those crossings. So get back to your question then. So we had the National Park Service had actually went out and monitored some bridges that had very heavy vegetation next to the crossings, and other bridges that were more maintained or more maintained better. And so they really didn't find a difference there, that they were still working, pretty well. I will say from our maintenance guys, when we ask them to do maintenance, you have to be very prescriptive of what you're looking for. So we had, actually this wildlife crossing here, you can see the vegetation in it. We said, hey, can you clean out a few of that just to provide some kind of pathways for the wildlife, just so it's not so overgrown? They denuded the whole thing. There's not a leaf left in the place. It was like, oh, that's not what I wanted. So we got to be very prescriptive of it. The other thing is, hey, can you clean this up a little bit? They literally stood on the bridge with, not insecticide, but grass weed killer, and sprayed it off the bridge and said, yep, we're good. So you have to be very detailed of what you're looking for. So I know when we monitor the crossings, we go down, we have a weed whacker. We go down and do some maintenance on them. But that is one area, we have a difficult enough time just managing, just on Alligator Alley alone. You've got, over 100 miles of wildlife fencing on there just to keep that, with cars hitting it. You get, actually, I guess it's poaching, but they go in and they harvest the palm berries out of there. And so they cut holes in the fences, so we have to repair them. And so it's a constant, job of just trying to keep that maintenance up there. So.
2 minutes.
2 minutes. Any more questions? Are there any questions on the online thing? No? Okay. Well, he's got one more. He's got it all. Go for it.
Is there much collaboration directly with sort of the land trust, land conservation community, with the DOT in terms of protecting land on these prospective wildlife crossing sites?
So I'll say that's the kind of the point of this is that collaboration that we're looking for. I'll say that we've had, in my experience, I've had very limited success, and that's one of the avenues that I'm looking to really grow is to find those land trusts because we've identified areas where we need a crossing and there aren't adjacent conservation lands. I've reached out to NGOs and said, hey, can you help us out here? Can you look at this? And for whatever reason, it hasn't happened. And so, good news is we're still pushing forward, still doing our thing. But, a lot of times too, the struggles are for the land trusts and the NGOs is they have to have a willing seller too. And so if you don't have that, then that makes it a little bit more challenging. So versus the state, we have eminent domain authority. And so we can, as long as we have need necessity, we can buy the conservation lands.
We have a couple of land trusts in the state that are working on tinkering with their model to be more targeted rather than opportunistic, and to look at areas and to see how they can get some buy-in from folks in areas where we need to close corridors. So those models, we'll have a report out in a year and a half from Tall Timbers, which we're really looking forward to seeing what their analytics are. They're working with Florida State University on that approach, and hopefully we'll get more success and we'll be able to sort of target areas that we need to close corridors. And it's an important question.
Thank you all very much. Appreciate it.